Hi, my name's Carol Ricard, and thank you so much for being here. This is the inaugural episode of I Am Not Cancer. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the show and about myself here in a little bit. But first, I want to start out with a question. Two birds were sitting on a wire. One decides to fly away. How many are left? Now, you have an answer floating around in your head. I'm going to give you the right one in just a minute. But first, I have to tell you all really where I heard this. I didn't come up with this little riddle. Turns out I went to a financial workshop, an investing workshop about, 20 years ago. You know how you get those little postcards in the mail and they kind of sometimes, before COVID, they actually used to be, come to the diner or this restaurant and they'll give you this nice meal and you'll sit and of course they want to try and sell you something, right? Well, I had always been wanting to learn about investment, so I decided to go. And it was no fancy, it was kind of like a brunch sort of thing. Drove an hour to it, and the guy who was leading it, asked this riddle of those of us in the audience. And what he asked to do was, those who thought it was one, would you please stand up? So I stood up because two birds, one decided, to fly away, one was left. That was it, one. And then he proceeded to tell us that the answer was two. And honestly, I was a little embarrassed. We all sat back down. And then here's the next part. And this is why it changed my life. Because he said, deciding and doing are two different things. Just because you decide something doesn't actually mean that you do it. And in that moment, I had one of those Oprah ha-has, right? I was like, oh my God. There have been so many times in my life where I actually decided, but I never did it. And I used to put my own little twist on this with my patients. And that was knowing and doing are two different things. And you can know something, but it doesn't do you any good to know it if you don't actually do it. And I have a great example of this. So, when I do a live workshop, I will usually ask people to raise their hands. Who knows that when your stress gets too high, that it's bad for your health? And sure enough, everybody in the room will actually raise their hands because we're all smart enough. We all know that too much stress is bad for your health. But did you know that research shows that 80% of people don't do anything regularly about their stress. And only 20% of people actually do something. And it's a perfect example of knowing and doing. 100% of people, I would venture to say, know that too much stress is bad for their health. But only 80% know it, 20% are actually doing it. And so what I'd like to say, and the reason I start with this little story is because what this show is going to be about, it could change your life. It has going to have the power to transform people's lives. And if you know it isn't enough, what I want you to do is take what you learn on this show and actually use it, do it, put it into practice. Now, this show is perfect for you if you are somebody whose life has been touched by cancer. That is, you could be the person who is living with the cancer, all right? You could be the friend, you could be the family member, you could be the caregiver, or you could just even be the coworker. And I come into this show, where cancer has quite honestly been a part of my life since I was a young girl. When I was 14 years old, I lost my father to lung cancer. And, we didn't talk about it. In fact, we didn't even know that my father was sick, right? And then, fast forward to when I'm 27 and I'm standing in the emergency room with my mom, and finally she says to me, Carol, it's cancer. And again, I came from a family that didn't talk about things, right? And I'm here to say that this show is all about talking about cancer, because we can't do anything that we don't talk about. We can't raise awareness. And again, I'll tell you a little bit more specifics about this show. But coming back to my mom, it was something that she felt like she had to keep secret. And, I actually ended up losing her, just later on that night. And so I have been a child that's been touched by cancer. I've been the daughter who's been touched by cancer, but I was also my mother's caregiver. Even though I was kind of being a caregiver for her, I didn't know that it was pancreatic cancer that really what I was sort of dealing with at the time. My mom had heart issues. In fact, she'd had a bypass, and so she was just really happy to let me think that that was all that was going on. And I'm here to say that, what? The more we keep secret, the more we give power to it. And my life kind of came full circle on a beautiful fall day in October of 2019. In fact, I want you to join me and sort of travel there back in time. You see, I was sitting in my doctor's treatment room, and it felt like I was there for an hour, when in fact, it was only 15 minutes. And I had been in to see her the week before because I'd had a procedure, and she'd given me some medication, some different choices to look over, because she thought that the medication was the cause of the problem that I was having. And so I was there that day to actually tell her what I had decided, because I needed to do a little bit of research before I made a decision. And so as I was sitting there, she kind of came in, and again, you're sitting there and it feels like forever, but really, in all fairness, it was just 15 minutes. But as she began to speak, I was completely blindsided. Carol, it's cancer. And in that split second, my mind sort of went wild. And then I caught it, all right? And I had this thought, well, God, it could have been there and I never knew it. At least now I could do something about it. And so with that, my focus, I was able to shift this really quickly. But I had a huge advantage that day, and that is for 30 years, I had been in hospitals teaching people how to better manage their stress. And so I had all of these tools that I had sort of been living and practicing. Now, I have to be completely honest with you all. I had not been, so good all of those 30 years. There were many, many years that I knew what to do, but I didn't do it, all right? And that actually all changed for me, after I ended up suffering migraines so horribly 3 weeks in a row that I landed in my doctor's office each one of those weeks. And finally, on the third visit, the doctor said to me, Carol, what's got you so stressed out? And I have to tell you all, I was really embarrassed, because here I was teaching my patients how to deal with stress, and I wasn't doing a very good job of it myself. And part of my problem is that I didn't have a lot of time. In a hospital, you don't get to control a lot of what goes on in life, right? And so there was no time. In fact, I didn't even have time to really eat my lunch, away from my desk. I was usually sitting down, eating my lunch, while I was working on something. And I had coworkers, on different floors who would go out for lunch. They would go out for a walk on their lunch. Guess what? I didn't have all that. And so my excuse was time. But what I realized was that if I didn't make a change, guess what? There's this saying, and a patient brought this to me one of my first years at the hospital that I worked at in Trenton, New Jersey, at Capital Health. And what it said was, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. And listen, I had worked in different hospitals. Hospitals weren't going to change. They were always going to be this. What needed to change was me. So here's how I discovered my secret system. I started using the tools I was teaching my patients, but for only 60 seconds. And because that was all the time I had, sometimes only 15 or 30 seconds. And so I discovered this whole different approach to stress that I call stressometry. Because here's the thing, and here's the bad news for, quite honestly, anybody, but really cancer patients, that stress management will fail you. Stress management failed me back 18 years ago. Because I would use my stress management tools. I would go to the gym after work, or I would go get a massage after work. The problem is my migraines would always hit me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I needed things that I could do in the moment. And that is what I discovered. And that is what you're going to learn on this show as we move forward. Is my mission with this show, quite honestly, is to really give you the tools that you need to sort of navigate the stress that comes along with a cancer diagnosis. And again, whether you're the patient, whether you're the family, the caregiver, or just a friend or a coworker. And there's 3 ways that we're going to do this as we move forward with this show. All right. After this, your next show is going to be an interview with a woman who is a stage 4 esophageal cancer survivor. And here's the thing I learned about her, that the odds of her survival were right around 4%. And what caught my attention was I belong to a support group online, actually several Facebook groups. And what ended up happening was she put on a post and she had shared how she had gone from stage 4, cancer, to now having her PET scan show she was cancer-free. And then she had to put a new post because her doctors didn't believe it was possible for her to be cancer-free, so they made her actually do a biopsy to look to see if there was really cancer-free. And guess what happened? That biopsy came back and it showed that she was cancer-free. And so I found her story to be so inspirational that I actually invited her to be my first guest, and that is the next show that we will have for you. But it's not just about inspiration and hope, it's also about information. I had 30 years of working in a hospital system, so I had all of this access to doctors and asking questions, and to, quite honestly, we even had a medical library, all right? And truthfully, what I realized was that for working in a hospital for 30 years, I really didn't know very much about cancer. And so I did a lot of reading and a lot of educating of myself. And we can't rely just on our doctors or our team, our treatment team, to educate us. And so that's the second part of the mission of this show, is to really provide people with very valuable information and resources so that you can make decisions based on information, and really just to educate yourself about that. And so one of the next guests that we had that you're going to be seeing is a woman who actually does pranic healing, which is an energy type of healing. And she has had some really good results in working with cancer patients. But I know for myself, all right, deciding what I was going to do for my treatment was one of the hardest decisions I had to make. There was one that was no decision, and that was, Carol, you know what? The surgery, having a hysterectomy, is what you need to have done. And so, boom, you know what? I was comfortable and okay with that, all right? But when I got the gut punch and it came back and said the cancer had spread to one of my ovaries, well, then it was like, oh crap, Now what am I going to do? And so, they had the protocol, and the protocol said, you're supposed to do radiation and chemotherapy. And, quite honestly, I'd had a family member who had gone through a particular type of chemotherapy, and it was a little bit different. And she had gone to Mexico to do that. And, so I was aware of all these other different options that were out there. And then I even had people that I had met and got to know who'd done an alternative path, who had great success. And so for me, that decision of what is it that I'm going to do, I really had to learn before I could make a decision. And so that's what I want to bring to this show, is just the resources and the knowledge so that you can become more informed. For myself, I decided upon an integrated approach, right? I figured is that I want as many tools helping me get well, as possible, all right? And today I am standing here, cancer-free, all right? And so I am just so grateful and feel like, quite honestly, I felt as I pulled away from my doctor's office back, it was October 9th of 2019. And anybody that's been given a cancer diagnosis, right? That date is etched in your brain. I couldn't tell you the exact time because quite honestly, I got called in, as a last minute appointment. All right, so it wasn't something I had scheduled. But I was driving away from that appointment, and I honestly felt like God had given me a new assignment, and he said, Carol, you would have never been able to help somebody with the stress of cancer without you first having to go through it yourself. And I honestly believe that with all of my heart, because those tools that I had been teaching and using were the tools that allowed me to really keep my stress levels really, really super low, all right? And I'll talk more about stress as we go along. But the one thing you need to know is if you are a cancer patient, all right, you are living in an unprecedented time right now, because not only do you have all of the stress that goes along with cancer, but you also have all the stress that goes along with COVID. And I know a thing about that because my chemotherapy and my treatment took place during the beginning of the pandemic and into the COVID pandemic. And so here's my point. We don't get to control what shows up in my life. In fact, I love to use cards as one of my stress tools with my patients and in live workshops. And my point being is that we don't get to control the cards that we're dealt in life, all right? Sometimes you will be dealt the king, and sometimes you will be dealt the two. And all we can do is play these cards out as best as we can. And when it comes to stress, that's what I'm here to teach. So it's about inspiring hope. This show is about informing you with the knowledge that you need. And then the other part is to empower you with the tools so that you can manage the stress, so that stress is not impacting your cancer. Because here's what I also learned in my research, all right? I always knew how dangerous stress could be to a person's health. But when I was looking at the connection between stress and cancer, the research is really super clear. And what the research shows is that one, high stress levels can definitely have an influence on the outcome of treatment, all right? And the second part of this, which really came out just about 6 months ago, and if you go to my website, which is iamnotcancer.live, which is L-I-V-E, right, or .live, I will actually have some of these articles and these resources there for you so that you can kind of print them out, because I don't know about you, but I actually like to have something in my hands. So when I was doing all this stuff online, I went through a whole ream of paper just because I needed to hold it and to see it. But to get back to it, about 6 months ago, there was actually a study that was released, the results, and it was published. And what it showed was that stress actually was found to be connected or linked to a reoccurrence of cancer. So that here's my point. It doesn't matter if you are on a cancer journey right now or you are in remission. Stress is one of the greatest threats that you have, and it's also going to be one of the greatest solutions that I'm going to provide for you. All right? And so that's why you want to come back, you want to keep tuning in here. In fact, what this show is, it's actually building off of coming out soon. I wanted to take and share my resources, and so this is the proof. It isn't available just yet, but I put what I used into this book and to share that with people, because what I discovered was, I call it the CALM principle. And it's the C-A-L and M, and how we can put those things into practice in our lives. And I have to tell you, when I would check in for my doctor's appointments, right, or my chemotherapy, you know, they always ask you, how are you feeling? They would always do a stress scale, you know, and I probably screwed it up completely for them, because, you know, they have from 0 to 10, and I was always put like, you know, a 1 or a 2, where I'm sure most people that were walking in that door, you know, put a 10. And what I'm going to share with you during this show is going to take you from that 10 and help you be able to dial that down. All right. So that is my promise. Now, here's the thing. I learned with my patients that it's not enough just to talk about something. And so what I love to do is make it visual. And so I actually brought, you know, some of the props with me that I'm going to use in my shows. But the first one that I really want you to walk away with understanding is that if we take this bottle of root beer and we shake it up, all right, you can see that the foam and the pressure builds up in this bottle. Well, here's the thing. Once the pressure goes in the bottle, it doesn't go anywhere. And what I like to say is that we are just like bottles of root beer. See, life shakes us up, and that pressure starts to build. It from the moment you wake up in the morning, all right, until actually going to bed at night. And even for some of you, if you're not sleeping, quite honestly, it continues through the night, right? But that level just starts to rise and rise and rise and rise and rise and rise and rise. And here's the thing. If you don't do anything about it, one of two things is going to happen. One, you are going to explode, meaning that it's going to come out over everybody else. And in some of the support groups I've been a part of, you know, women, you know, and husbands have asked, how can I deal with my spouse? Because they're so angry. And what's happening is that anger is spilling out over on them. But not everybody explodes, all right? There's also people that implode. And I happened to be one of those when I was getting my migraines. It never comes out. The stress stays in and just hurts us. And most people don't realize this, but true story. If you could see my bottle of Dr. Pepper now, what's really pretty amazing about this is that this was a bottle that used to be just like this bottle. But it stopped foaming, so I retired it in my live workshops and I put it in my garage. 4 months later, I went out and I realized that it had started to implode, so that even bottles, you know, can demonstrate to us that it implodes. And there's one last picture I want you to see, and that is this. Some people are more like the seltzer, because you could shake up a bottle of seltzer and I promise you, the pressure is building up on the inside, but you don't really see it. And so the whole secret to managing stress is that you gotta just act as if it's there, right? You may not see it, you may not feel it, but you need to say, and trust me that it's there. Now, so that's what we're gonna do. But here's the other really important reason, and I wanna ask you all a question. Have you ever taken one of these, which is a knife, and ever used it as one of these, a screwdriver? How'd it work? Well, you might be just like the people in my workshops would say, is I'd say, well, how'd it work? And they say, well, Carol, not too bad, you know. And then I'd always have to say, if I put together a hammock, one, I used a knife, one, I used a screwdriver, which one do you want to lay in? Of course, they always pick the one with the screwdriver. And also, what have you used duct tape for, right? There's that book, 1001 Ways How to Use Duct Tape. My point with these particular things is that these are quick fixes that we grab at, right? We don't have time to get the screwdriver, so we actually grab at the knife. We don't have time to fix the radiator hose, so I grab at the duct tape. The problem is they're just temporary, and they will go on to create even bigger problems, or you have to come back. I call these survival tools, right? They're things that we grab at to get us through the moment. Well, what I want you to realize is just like we can do that for physical things, we can also do that for emotional things. And I want to share a quick example of that with you. I shared with you that my father died when I was 14. Well, this was what I used to deal not only with his dying, but with finding out ahead of time that he was dying from cancer. Any alcohol. It didn't really have to be this particular beer, but I started stealing alcohol from my parents, and it worked. I hated the taste of it, but it helped me manage that overwhelm, all right? And one other example I just want to share with you, all right, and that is Oprah Winfrey. Oprah used food as her tool to sort of survive that trauma that she experienced as a little girl. And it wasn't until she made those connections that she was able to actually manage her weight. And here's my point with this, is that you right now might be using some of these survival tools, right? Just to deal with whatever it is that you can get through. But my promise to you is to come back, because I will share with you the right tools for the job. So that sort of brings us to the end of this episode. But what I want you to do is go over to IamNotCancer.live, L-I-V-E, all right? And the articles will be over there. You can always catch this show over there in case you missed it. And what I want to ask you all to do is to follow us on Facebook. Come back, and I will see you in the next show.